Tammy Curtis is a licensed clinical social worker with experience in both clinical and school settings. She learned through her early clinical work and advocating for her own child with ADHD the importance of prevention and early intervention efforts in schools and communities. Working for a large school district for the past 7 years, she created a Tier 1 wellness room system to teach students how to autonomously self-regulate that has grown from 35 schools in southern Utah to over 100 schools throughout the state and schools throughout the country. She has worked intentionally to connect schools to their community agencies and to promote connection and prevent suicide. She loves working with schools and recently joined the faculty at USU as a clinical assistant professor in the social work department on the Logan campus. In her free time, Tammy enjoys to do yoga, swim, read, spend quality time in nature and with her family and friends, and travel to see new places. Thanks for being with us here, Tammy. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm just excited to be here today. Thanks for having me. All right. Okay. And is that on? I think it's in slide mode. Actually, maybe not. How's that? Does that
Looks
look good?
good.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, today's topic is the power of connection, a community approach to suicide prevention. And as you know, suicide can be a difficult topic to discuss. So before we get started, I just want to encourage everyone to resource yourself. And I use that term to describe how we can access our internal coping and soothing skills. There's a term in when some therapists who do EMDR before they start a session, they'll help clients come up with what's called their restoration team. And that's just a process to create and strengthen those positive mental images or figures or even places that can provide us with that emotional support and stability, especially through difficult conversations and processes. And so think of that nurturing figure or protective figure or just a symbolic representation of what safety and empowerment is for you. And I just want you to take a moment and think about that so you can kind of harness that self-resourcement as we go through this conversation today. And our objectives are just understanding the impact of connection in suicide prevention, identifying key risk factors and warning signs of suicide, identifying collaboration between schools, agencies, and community resources, and understanding resources and post-mention strategies. So let's go ahead and find out first, why does connection matter? And if you wouldn't mind using the chat to just share, what do you feel like maybe some barriers are to conversations around suicide, discussions in your community? Are there barriers? Um, what might make that difficult in a community to have those discussions while we're thinking about connection? And Erin, thank you for monitoring the chat for us. While we're waiting for those to come in, we know that social isolation is a risk factor for suicide. We also know that strong relationships create that protective buffer against distress, and that we know resilience is built through connection, that one stable, caring adult. So this is really important. And I would like to define this as Brene Brown does in all of her research. When she boiled down what does connection mean, all of the data showed that connection was that energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. And so I want you to be thinking about, how do we help others feel seen, heard, and valued, not just micro, but meso and macro. And Erin, do we have?
Tammy, there's a lot of good discussion here in the chat. Some
Great.
of the answers that have come in have been stigma, shame, lack of trust, fear of getting sent to the hospital automatically, personal trauma. What if they say I'm suicidal? Stigma again. Someone says COVID has created a chasm of discussion, the mentality that you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and embarrassment.
Sure. All very, very valid barriers to these discussions and making this difficult to get ahead of. We're going to talk about some of the statistics, and I hope that we can address with our conversation today a lot of those barriers that you brought up. Because unfortunately, sometimes it feels like we move backward instead of forward. We get to a point where we feel like You know, we've come so far, and then it almost feels like some things send us backward. So I'm excited to talk about that with you. I want to share an example. We're going to watch a short video clip of, I think, is something that we could think outside the box a little bit and relate to. So this video is about a teacher working with a student. But again, you could relate this in any setting that you're working with, especially if you're working with children.
I have a lot of memories from when I was a child. One that's always stuck out to me, though, was when I was about 10 years old and I was in school and I struggled. And I didn't struggle with English, math, or science. I struggled holding still. And I would try to listen and focus and process ideas, but I couldn't help myself. And to be honest, I would sit there and then I would just start tapping. And the students in the class would look at me and they'd say, "Hey, stop tapping." A lot of the time, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then eventually, even the teachers got after me and they would yell at me and they'd say, "Clint, you have to stop tapping." It got so bad that I got sent to the principal's office for tapping. And he said to me, "Okay, maybe when you go back to class, just try sitting on your hands." So I did. I went back to class, and when I felt myself starting to tap, I did this. I sat on my hands. And that worked for about 5 seconds. One time I was tapping in class, and my teacher, Mr. Jensen, he looked at me and he yelled. And he said, "Clint, stay after class." And I thought to myself, this is it. I am done. Now, I've always been the type of person that believes that a single moment in time can change a person's life. And this was one of those moments for me, and I will never forget it. So I was sitting there with Mr. Jensen and an empty classroom. And he walked past me and he sat next to his desk and he said, "Clint, come here. I want to talk to you." And as he looked me right in the eye, he said, "Now, I need you to know something. You're not in trouble, but I do have just one question that I have to ask you." And he said, "Have you ever thought about playing the drums?" And in that moment, Mr. Jensen, he leaned back and he opened the top drawer of his desk. And he reached in and he pulled out my very first pair of drumsticks. And he held them in his hands and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Clint, you're not a problem. I think you're a drummer." That moment on, I've never put those sticks down. I've toured, recorded, played drums all over the world. My whole college education was paid for with drumsticks in my hand. Just because of a single moment in time when somebody believed in me and he saw something in me that I didn't even see within myself. Yet from that moment, I learned that there's a difference between being the best in the world and being the best for the world.
All right. This is called Be a Mr. Jensen. And I really love this when it comes to our approach to how we are, I'm just going to go back a couple slides, how we are connecting in our communities. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, guys, I'll get there. Because sometimes we have to think outside the box. And I think that Mr. Jensen was able to look at a little boy and see his strengths instead of all the weaknesses. And it just drives home that message of we need to be that strengths-based approach. And so no matter what area we work in, can we be that Mr. Jensen? And can we look at those maybe undiscovered strengths, especially in a community when we serve so many people with so many different strengths and talents? Can we overlook maybe that the thing that's presenting as the problem to see, you know, could we dig a little deeper here and really do something that would help support them? We do know that there's a huge need to build connection, as statistics in Utah are that our suicide rates are higher than the national average. We average 685 suicides annually, give or take. That's the most recent data. The leading cause of death among youth in Utah is ages 10 to 17, and the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 44. Also, we know males have a much higher rate than females. So from ages 20 to 24, males are 41 per 100,000, where females are 7 per 100,000. The SHARP survey, this is the Student Health and Risk Prevention Survey that is given in our schools over the last 20 years, every other year in grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. Most recent data, this is on odd years. Almost 18% of youth in Utah seriously considered attempting suicide, and 42, almost 43% reported feeling sad, hopeless, or suicidal and not telling anyone about it. So there is a bit of a silence around it for probably all the reasons that you suggested. And that 18% of youth seriously considering suicide, that is very much in alignment with statistically in Utah, where almost about 20% of youth who have a mental health condition, about 20% of youth who have experienced trauma and need intensive support. So that 20% is a pretty average number when we're looking in our state. The thing about suicide is there's not just one thing to look for. This is why I think it can be difficult to detect, is that sometimes historically we thought, oh, depression is the only risk factor, and that's not true. There's really so many things involved. Typically, mental health is an underlying condition, but in our state, probably for more than the last 5 years, as IHC has worked on a mental health integration in their clinics, their medical clinics throughout the state, they've administered a trauma screener. Their data have showed that trauma has been more correlated with suicide than even depression. And so we want to be very aware of that and just open that lens, looking at who are socially isolated, who's maybe going through a crisis. Sometimes there's those underlying things going on, but that crisis is the impetus. You've probably heard of the 10-minute rule, where when a crisis does occur, that if we can help someone in those first 5 to 10 minutes, that can pass. That if it's very impulsive and very emotionally driven, that we just need to shift and get them through that 10 minutes. Also, access to means is crucial when it comes to risk factors if kids have access. We want to also really market and let people know that mental health conditions are treatable, that substance abuse problems are treatable. And so the best way to prevent suicide is through that early detection, diagnosis, and treatment. And so we're going to talk about that today. Now, some of you probably already have kind of a lens of, understanding suicide. I know for me as an early practitioner, I was still a little bit unknowing about, what gets someone to the point. It's really hard to understand and then deal with the aftermath of this, right? And so one way that helps me understand and think about this is this image. And we all probably remember 9/11 when those airplanes hit the towers in New York. And what happened was very unexpected. If you remember, people started jumping from the windows in that building. And the reason that I use this to make sense of suicide is because our brain is desired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And that day, those people were just doing what they were wired to do, which was escape that pain. And if you think of physical pain, typically we seek a doctor. We look for analgesics to calm that down or temper that pain, right? And so I think, well, what are those metaphorical analgesics that aren't medication for that emotional pain? And these are just some that have really been present in working with people, is that hope can really be an analgesic. Connection, right? Can provide so much comfort. Kindness, laughter releases those natural endorphins. Creative expression, being able to engage in those things that really open our mind, and we can just get into that flow and just be distracted maybe from reality for a time. Quality time with our friends and family. distracting with the things that you enjoy. So what are your hobbies? What are those ways that you engage in self-care, as we just heard earlier from Jen and Susan, the importance of self-care. Have a perspective. Are we focusing on gratitude? Are we focusing on, well, all these things are going wrong, there's still all these other things that are probably going right, and can we focus there? What about forgiveness, and self-compassion? Not in any way the least of these. Self-compassion can be a huge analgesic. In fact, there is data. If you follow Kristen Neff and her research, as she really started publishing and contributing to the literature on self-compassion, that there is an actual physical change with that because of the oxytocin that is released. We know how important hugs are, that 8-second hug that we all need to get that oxytocin flowing, that eye contact, that touch, because we're mammals. And we are wired for that, right? We are wired to connect through touch. Babies are the only mammal that can't survive on their own from birth. And so they are wired to seek that caregiving, that comfort. And that oxytocin really helps us feel safe and connected, versus where criticism or, threat releases cortisol and shuts down our thinking brain. And so there's a real chemical effect going on. If we can offer ourselves self-compassion, it's as if, we can give our own selves a hug, just like if we were getting that hug from somebody else. And so thinking about these analgesics, how can we soothe that emotional pain and that discomfort? And also at some level, can we make space for that discomfort? But we need each other. Again, that concept of connection. Some of the warning signs to be aware of is behaviorally. When we start to see people withdrawing and being more isolated, not participating in things they normally would, or even giving away possessions, or even listening to the things that they're saying, I can't do this anymore, this is too painful, or even I'd be better off dead, people would be better off without me. And then situational, again, that crisis situation. There's so many more. Loss is a big deal, perpetual bullying, legal trouble, and that would include things on social media that get kids in trouble. There's typically a crisis situation that strikes as the impetus when these impulsive decisions are made. So thinking about behavior as communication, we have a saying that comes from Ross Green, a child psychologist, who says children do well if they can. And we need to extend that to adults too. We all do as well if we can, right? If we have the skills to do well. And so being that emotional scientist, what is this person trying to tell me they can't articulate with words? And honor their behavior as their attempt to communicate the only way they can in that moment. And so are we listening for what's not being said through that? So being very observant. And some signs that people might be experiencing pain is disrespect, disruption. We see this at schools very commonly. People hurting others, harming property, harming themselves, engaging in aggression, being very sad or depressed, either sleeping or eating too much or too little, and not showing up, being absent. So we can take those as indications as something's going on here. Somebody's not doing well. And the other thing that I think is kind of a key in helping people understand is the difference between depression and sadness. There is a difference. Sadness is an emotion that we experience if we're experiencing depression, but it's different. So if you're depressed, you may feel sad, but after you express that emotion, you don't find relief. It often involves mean thoughts about yourself and hopelessness and suicide thoughts, a distorted perception, right? Like others would be better off without us, that loss of perspective, there's no way out, I'm going to feel this way forever, it's too painful, and prevents a range of specific emotions. Where with sadness, we typically would feel better after expressing that emotion, and it wouldn't involve those mean thoughts or that hopelessness or the suicide thoughts or the distorted perception, and it doesn't interfere with feeling other emotions. So I think that's an important thing to discover. And if someone is experiencing a continued sadness, if it's been, a couple of weeks, then we really want to look at that and find out, okay, what's going on here. I think this is a little bit more than something that's making us sad. Some of those protective factors are having strong school connections. Schools are where the kids are, and the bulk of our communities are our children and families, kids that are in school. And so creating that culture of belonging where teachers can have these positive relationships with their students, and then providing access to mental health. And I want to share some specific ways that we can work together as a community and do that. Also educating our students on coping and problem solving skills. That's another area we're going to talk more about, creating those positive peer relationships, building that social network. Some kids feel very alone in elementary school and adolescence. There are some kids that are lonely and don't seem to have a lot of friends. And so can we be looking for that and encourage friendships and creating that network? Also, there are screeners. So the state has asked school districts to do mental health screening. So there's different ways that can be done, but screening early so we can detect any signs and intervene with these kids. And then reducing stigma around mental health. We're going to talk about some ways that we can really raise awareness around suicide. And then also have those crisis response plans in place. Everyone needs to know exactly what we do when someone presents with suicide ideation or intent. I want to talk a little bit about what we've done. So how one way we can connect with our agencies, this is something that we did in Washington County, is we created a mental health assistance program. And we used some of our state mental health grant to pay for this. And what it was is we created a way to collaborate with multiple mental health agencies in the community. So these are people that raised their hand and said, yes, I want to be a part of this. I want to help serve students in this school district. And we would pay out of that grant the first 5 sessions of therapy for a student. Now, these students had to be referred, so parents were educated about this, and then they were instructed, have your student or you talk to the school counselor. And the school counselor was the gatekeeper of this program, or the school social worker. And they would then make a referral for this student, again, to get those first 5 sessions for free. This was a really effective program. I have some data that I'll show you on that. And some of the statistics there. But this was a great way to not supplant a family's role in getting that support, but to get them started and to reduce stigma. Look, this is available. Why not try it? I mean, 5 times for free. And so that was really helpful. Also, we opened it up to those specific agencies who were providing that support. Hey, would you like to do a monthly parent night with us? And so is there a topic that you find is really in need in your in your practice? And so we would get a different person volunteering every month to offer those parent nights so we could continue to educate the parents and again reduce that stigma. And then I'm going to talk about these as we go because I have slides. So I'm going to just mention through the emergency department, we did a Return to Learn program that I'll tell you about. And then, of course, we use 988, the Safe UT app, and MCOT, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But statistically, in our district, we had 35 wellness rooms, and you can see here how those visits looked. So this was over about 35 schools. And you can see the number throughout those trimesters. That's a lot of opportunities for kids to self-regulate. We also saw more males than females visiting our wellness room, which as we look at the statistics in suicide, I think you'll find this very important and exciting that we had males visiting and getting those opportunities to self-regulate more often than females. So that's exciting. And I know it's close, but they still exceeded that female percentage. Also, we track their emotions when they arrive and leave, and they're self-regulated when they arrive and leave, and pretty good outcomes here. And this is an elementary and secondary combined. So if you separate it, it would be a little bit higher elementary level. Secondary is what brings it down a little bit because those adolescents get in moods that are a little more stable. But that percentage of emotion improvement was in that 60 percentile, and the percentage of self-regulation was close to 80%. Which is pretty effective and exciting. And so these are kids learning at a very young age how to self-regulate, how to use my coping skills, how to build a connection with someone and have that bridge to counseling, because the wellness rooms don't provide counseling, but they become a safe place where then kids open up and are willing to then seek counseling. So it really is a win-win. Some of the statistics with the MAP program. So we did have a little bit more females than males use this, but that's still pretty good, you guys. That means still males were accessing therapy. And this was that first line of intervention. In schools, we have a multi-tiered system of support. So this would be considered that tier 3. We'd get to that point where the student needed extra help and make that referral. And you can see our 5th and 6th graders were our highest accessors, followed by our 10th and 11th graders. Now that 10th and 11th grade is important to look at because we also track data from our local emergency room. Who was presenting to the emergency room for those suicide evaluations? And the most common average age was 16. And so we're really happy to see that in our community, those 10th and 11th graders were accessing that free mental health at a high rate, which was really good.
Hey,
So
Tammy,
oh,
there's
yeah.
a question here in the chat. Someone's wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what the wellness rooms were and kind of what that looked like, that intervention.
Yeah, let's go back. So I don't have a picture of it, but wellness rooms are a space in a school where we would set up just a safe space that doesn't look like a classroom. So lamp lighting, nice art, bringing nature in, comfortable chairs, a rocking chair, all the different things you could think of to promote sensory awareness and also that just parasympathetic nervous system activation. So that rocking motion, right? Teaching kiddos how to tap, either doing the butterfly tap or the EFT tapping, and a lot of sensory items. Ideally, these rooms are staffed by a paraprofessional, not a social worker, because we don't do therapy in the wellness room, just a paraprofessional who gets training to be able to support students as they self-select to come in throughout the day. So you're at school and you're getting very dysregulated for whatever reason. Maybe you just broke up with your boyfriend, girlfriend. Maybe your parents got in an argument last night. Maybe your pet died. So many different reasons that we would come to school and not be prepared to learn or not be able to sit and focus, or just maybe neurodivergence is something that keeps us, like we observed in Mr. Jensen. And so these kids can self-select to take a break, and they get 5 to 10 minutes in a room, which is really a sensory room, where they can just activate that parasympathetic nervous system so that they can get back to learning, get that thinking brain back online. And it's found to be very, very effective and very preventative. In fact, as they talk about these other statistics, one thing that we found is that we haven't got to return to learn yet, but all of our data showed the kiddos that had accessed return to learn hadn't accessed our wellness rooms. And so we know that it is a preventative support, that it does work, and it is a bridge to get kiddos to counseling. Any more clarification on that? Okay. So schools opt into that, of course, and they want funding because they need to set up the room and then they want to pay that paraprofessional to be there. And again, that's the ideal setup, one more resilience builder in the school. So with the community agencies being involved, we really appreciate that we can get more therapy out there to kids, right? And that connects more families as well. Return to learn, this is where we work with the hospitals. And so, where the emergency department would be that place where people would go to get that suicide evaluation, to get that support, determine if they need a safety plan or if they need to be admitted to inpatient. What we did, and we didn't just work with the emergency department, we expanded this by request to the pediatricians as well. So think, if you think of where do the most people go, they go to our hospitals and they go to our schools, right? That is two systems that most people access. And so even pediatricians, anyone who was willing to do this with us, if they felt like they would identify someone with suicide ideation, then they could refer through our Return to Learn. And what this meant is if a student did not get admitted to inpatient behavioral health, but they were released with a safety plan, they would get consent from parents to let us know so that the school counselor could then call the parent and say, hey, I was just notified that Susie was in the ER last night for suicide ideation. I just wanted to call and check in. How's everything going? And I understand that you left with a safety plan, but we would like to create a safety plan here at school before she gets back to class. When is a time when you could come in and meet with me? And so it's that warm connection. When these things are happening, families are in crisis, parents are in crisis. It's really hard for them to think about all the things they need to do. And so this really takes all that stress and pressure off, where we call them and invite them to have that conversation. And then what we do is we meet with the parent and the student, and we do a safety plan for the school setting before they return to class. And we find that to be very helpful in having that transition. And you can see our 10th and 11th graders. They were our highest users of MAP, incidentally. They were our highest users of Return to Learn as well. A little more female than male, which we know is pretty standard because more females will ask for help in this way than our males will. But that has been really helpful. So again, another great way to include that community and those areas that that we can all connect. Return to Learn. It does require parents to give consent. Does every parent give consent? No. So we are missing some, but the idea, the more we destigmatize, the more we educate, the more we help and inform, hopefully we start to see that statistic. And this is just that brief explanation of it is we just had a QR code with this handout for parents to understand what it was. And then the QR code brought up their referral form. And so they could fill it out right then and there. And it had consent built into it. And then we would get that referral. So it was really slick, really simple. And it's definitely something that every community could work with. That agency that does those crisis evaluations could do this. And I'd be happy to be a resource if you want to reach out for more information. Another thing that we did is we did training for QPR. You may have heard or be trained in this. QPR is that question, persuade, refer. And this is really helping dispel that myth. Sometimes people think if we talk about it, it will make it worse. When actually the opposite is true. When you actually ask someone, have you thought about taking your life? Have you thought about hurting yourself? That it actually is more of a relief that now they can talk about it. And so QPR is a great training for teachers, for really our medical staff, all of our communities that again would work with the public. QPR is a great training to have. Locally, where I was in Washington County, our government agency, Southwest Behavioral Health, they had QPR trainers, so they would do that training for free for our educators, for our schools. In Logan, I'm not sure of an entity. If there is one that you know of, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat. I'm not sure that we have trainers that provide that for free, so there is a cost. But this is a great one to look at for your communities, is offer QPR trainings. And I'm going to tie this into another support that we'll get to too. But I did put the link here for their website so you can get more information. And there's even a link to an online book that's about 100 pages. That's a pretty good book about suicide. Now, in schools, I talked a little bit about we operate in that multi-tiered system of support. So the other thing that we want to set up in our schools is that we are using positive behavior supports. We're teaching everyone what it means to be trauma informed, that we're creating that culture of connection. We're being very intentional about building relationships with students. We want them at school. We want them to know that we care about them. Having those wellness rooms, and then building in restorative practices, which means that when kids do need discipline, that it all comes back to repairing the relationships that were damaged in the process of the incident. And again, giving them the skills and the training rather than the punishment. It doesn't mean a punishment won't be there, but it's the teaching and the training and the accountability that's there. Also, those peer support programs, a lot of schools do Hope Squads that you're probably familiar with, where they learn skills, how to be friendly with peers, how to support peers in case they were to disclose that they were experiencing suicide thoughts. Even wellness clubs that promote wellness throughout the school. This has really been important since we started wellness rooms. The kids have been excited about that and want to be part of a wellness club. And then some schools do, in addition to, we have the Safe UT app we'll talk about a little bit, but some schools just have their own Google form with a QR code that says, see something, say something. So anyone can submit a tip if they're concerned about someone. And that gives the school immediate data. And this can be about bullying, it can be about anything so that we can be preventative and intervene quickly. So just some ideas out there around that. And please feel free to ask questions as we go. I will leave time at the end as well. But postvention is super important because unfortunately suicide happens. And then what do we do? And it's important that we come together as a community, and especially in schools where we serve the kids. We really want to make sure that we're doing specific things because we want to mitigate any adverse outcomes from that. So we need to immediately provide support for the families, for our students, for our faculty. It's also important that we're transparent in our communication, that we're very neutral, and we have clear procedures for how we let people know. Typically, we let the faculty know before we let the students know, and there's usually a template for an email that will go out to notify families. We also want to provide training and education around postvention strategies because, again, there are some negative outcomes that can occur that we can mitigate. And then providing that long-term grief support, recognizing our community needs to heal from this. So one thing that schools need to do and strive to do in communities as well is treat all student suicide deaths the same way. We don't want to reinforce or glorify or aggrandize the death of a suicide in a suicide. And so we also want to focus on how the student lived rather than how they died. We want to raise awareness around mental health conditions and also use that opportunity to raise awareness around prevention and increasing that support system. Schools can share out those mental health resources, get people connected to therapy, share the warning signs, how to support people who are struggling. And a couple ways that we really focused on this was May and September, because May is Mental Health Awareness Month and September is National Suicide Prevention Month. So really at the beginning and the end of the year. And this is a great way, again, to involve your community with those ribbons. So last year in May, what we did is a Light the Town Green, and we encouraged businesses to hang a poster of mental health awareness. We had activities throughout the whole month and encouraged them to hang green ribbons. We worked through our prevention coalition with grant funding to provide the green ribbons. We had all of our schools hang green ribbons, and we even had a like for example, in St. George, they have that big D on the mountain that lights up when the team wins. And we asked them if they would light the D green for mental health awareness one day in May. So it'd be kind of similar, like if Utah State did the A on the Aggie Tower green for Mental Health Awareness Month. It's that kind of a thing. It's getting everyone involved. We're going to light the town green and we're going to have these activities. So we offered free QPR training throughout the month. We offered educational seminars that people could sign up for free. And then we did activities at the schools where we did awareness campaigns, but also taught coping skills and reinforced kids for participating. So typically 1 week out of the month we would dedicate to that. And then September was very similar in the teal and the purple ribbons and having a walk for suicide awareness and prevention. So there's things like that that the community can get involved with and raise awareness around that. So we really want to focus on prevention and we want to mitigate contagion, because when a suicide happens, contagion can happen. And that just means that another death is more likely because of the suicide that occurred. And so we want to really pay attention to any students that might be at more risk. And this is why we don't create any permanent memorials. We don't want to glorify the death of suicide. And then the other thing is with our parents, helping them understand why we do that, right? And then encouraging them, if your child wants to go to the funeral of the student, go with them. Provide that support. It shows your love and concern for them. You're able to monitor them to see how they're doing. You can have a discussion about it. You can remind them that help's available and you focus on hope. I had a young gal in my neighborhood who her best friend died by suicide when they were juniors in high school, and her mom was at a loss of how to help her because her own daughter had struggled with this. And she went to the funeral with her. She followed all of this, and the outcome was really well. Her daughter's married, has a baby, and is thriving. But that was a rough time. She was really at risk for contagion when her best friend passed away. So it's important what we do and how we support these kids. We're looking at risk of, is there a history of suicide attempts for that student or in their family? Again, when people die by suicide, it seems like a solution to their problem. But what happens is now that's a legacy in that family that never leaves. And their people are more at risk because of a family member who did that. And this can be very painful and difficult. People never get over this, the loss of their loved ones. It's very difficult. And so we need to be mindful of that and really recognize how important that support system is to connect to that. And I want to talk about a concept with this. Look for people who are dealing with those stressful life events, those crises, or if people witness the death, then they're very high risk. We want to make sure we connect them right away. Those family members, the friends, paying attention to them. Also, people are at risk if they were the last person to communicate with the deceased, if they received a phone call or a text or other communication, and they feel guilty that maybe they missed warning signs. We need to intervene with them. If maybe the last interaction was negative, then that is also very difficult. Or someone who may have fought or bullied with them. Guilt is a very strong emotion when it comes to suicide, and we want to really help and reach out to these people. There's a very good book, if you haven't read it, called Finding Meaning. This is by David Kessler. What's great about his book is he actually worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on the stages of grief. And he said there's actually a sixth stage called Finding Meaning. And he has dealt with a lot of grief as a grief therapist and experiencing the loss of his own son. He's able to really merge these two worlds. It's a book I highly recommend to people who have lost someone and to therapists alike. And some of those coping strategies with our particular people at risk, what do they want to remember about their friend? Do they want to write a personal note to the family, go to that memorial service? Creating a memory book is okay. And, sending those kind acts, doing kindness and serving can be great ways to help. But in appropriate ways, again, not in glorifying the suicide. Also anticipating the anniversary of death. That's going to be a hard date for everyone every year. That's going to be a difficult time. So really ramping up their coping strategies, cultivating hope. What is something that they're looking forward to? Increasing the things that they're really excited about and helping them get there. I like this concept that we are student surrogate self-belief until they get their own. And so how can we really bring out their strengths and work with them on that goal attainment? This goes a long way. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about Viktor Frankl, but he talked about one of those things that got him through that time of great suffering in the concentration camps was the hope that he would get to be with his wife one day, that he would get to write the book he wanted to write. He stayed very focused on the goals and the hope and the ways that he wanted to serve. Now, we also want to be mindful of safety planning and how important the safety plans are. So these kiddos who are at risk, we're going to do a safety plan for them. And this is something that they commit to doing, that they sign, they contract to keep themselves safe. And it identifies anything that they need to pay attention to that would start them thinking down this path. And then what can they do in that moment? Places, people they can call. And again, those things they're looking forward to, what gives them hope. So we want to make sure we're doing safety planning and just the concept of you as that stable, caring adult in this child's life. We build resilience through relationships, right? And so being that champion, being, that person that has their back is very important to help these kiddos know they have someone. Now, one thing that I think is hard for a lot of us is a concept I'm going to talk about that we really need to normalize. And it came to me when I was on this ziplining tour, and I was so excited to get out and fly through these trees and how exhilarating this would be. But our guide, he said, before we get out there, there's something you need to know. This is the most important word you're going to need to know today. So we were all very excited about, oh, what is this important word? Because what's more important than getting out there on this zip line? And he said, this is the word that you need to know. And he was a Spanish speaker, native, so it's a Spanish word, ayúdenme. And does anyone speak Spanish that could share what that word is? You could type it in the chat or unmute. What does that mean?
People in the chat are saying it means help me.
Yes. Yeah, it's the Spanish for help me. How many people don't raise their hand, don't ask for help? And why? Because they're stigma or they're embarrassed or they think it's weakness. Asking for help is never weakness. Asking for help is actually strength. And I know how hard this is. You know, just a real quick example. I worked in a treatment facility for young ladies with eating disorders, and these were very medically fragile young ladies. And because of that, they had specific activity levels that they could do. We were all trained in CPR in case anything happened. And one day at the gym, playing, I believe, tennis, one of the ladies collapsed, and our staff had to perform CPR until the ambulance could get there. And that act of CPR saved her life. The next day at work, because I wasn't there, I was very on high alert. What if I don't remember CPR? What if I would have forgot how to, I wasn't even there, but I was having this after effect of, what if I didn't know it? And so I wrestled with this thought of, one, I want to go talk to the nurse and review these CPR steps and really make sure I know it. And then two, I doubted, if I say something, what if she thinks, well, then you shouldn't be working here if you don't remember CPR, And do sometimes we worry about that? Do we worry about that we've got to be perfect and that we have to remember every single thing? But luckily I overcame that. And I went to her and I said, will you just review the steps of CPR? I just really want to make sure that I've got this. This just has made me a little bit nervous. And she said, absolutely, that's the right thing to do. Let's practice. And what I didn't know at the time, but I know now, is the Gaines Foundation surveyed over 2,000 leaders, and the number one behavior that people engage in that makes leaders trust them more is asking for help. It is raising our hand. It is strength. But are we normalizing it and are we teaching it? Because we value independence so much, because we value self-reliance so much. And while independence and self-reliance is great, the reality is we all need help sometimes. And so how do we teach our kids? How do we normalize in our community that it's okay to ask for help? And we want to do that. So I do want to, I'm not going to be able to talk about this just in the essence of time. It's just my Viktor Frankl spiel that I do love, but I want to make sure that we have time to talk about these resources and then that you have time to ask some questions. So suicide prevention. The CDC has a website. It's right here listed at the bottom. They have great resources, strategies for communities specifically to reduce suicide. So the Suicide Prevention Resource for Action is a great resource. Also, in 2024, so just last year, SAMHSA has created the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. Well, it's funded through SAMHSA, and there's a website here you can go to. But this strategy is a nationwide 10-year plan designed to address and mitigate suicide rates in our country. This is a whole society approach, and there are online assessments that you can do to see where you're at and what you need. So I did put the link there as well. So access these links. They have great resources available, and I think that those needs assessments can be really helpful. The purpose of this strategy for prevention is to create those recommendations for communities to bridge any gaps, to focus on those connections, enhancing care and collaboration in communities. And so it outlines goals, objectives, populations that are disproportionately affected by suicide, and also data-driven approaches where we can take data, we can research and evaluate our prevention efforts. And so we can, contribute to the literature on what is making a difference. There's over 200 actions that we'll undertake through the next couple of years. And these are monitored So if you're interested in this, again, access this link on this page is for a document. I think it's a few pages that will help. And these are some things that they would like to do. So they really want to advocate for communities. There's not specific funding available unless you apply for it, but there is grant funding available. So your communities could look at, could we apply for a grant to help us with this? The Safe UT app, still, we're so lucky in Utah to have this support. Everyone should download it. You can submit a tip, start a chat, start a call. So Safe UT is an amazing app to share with people. And then also, of course, the 9888 prevention line. Again, that QPR training. And then there's some great resources on these websites that I've listed here as well. And then let me just finish with this. What is one thing that you can take this week to strengthen prevention in your community? And I want you to think about it. You can write it down, you can share it in the chat, but just what is one thing from what we've talked about, the different things that we have available in our communities that maybe we just need to connect with this person or make that phone call, or maybe we could connect this dot. What is just maybe one thing you could do to strengthen suicide prevention in your community? So I want you to think about that, because I do want a few of you to share out what you would do. Again, that Mental Health Awareness Month in May is a really neat lift, but that requires collaboration with the community. But all good things to normalize mental health and destigmatize mental health. I love the focus on mental health rather than mental illness, because mental health denotes that we're all doing those things that we need to be healthy. We're promoting well-being, and that protects us and prevents us from getting to that point of mental illness. And so really promoting mental health, really promoting well-being. Erin, do we have any comments in the chat so far?
Yes, we have some great ones in the chat. Someone shared they're going to be more willing to ask when they become concerned for those within their circle of care. Multiple people are saying they're going to share the Safe UT app more. Asking for help in general, invite QPR training to a staff meeting. I really like this one. It says, one other thing I want to add with the, is it ayúdame, how you say the help me phrase in Spanish? I'm not a Spanish speaker. It says, one thing I want to add with the phrase is asking for help in a plural sense. So I think of how that might be asking multiple people for help and not just one person.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love it. Good. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I want to leave this open for questions so that we can talk about what are some maybe clarification or some ideas you have floating around based on how we overcome that stigma, that fear. What can we do? And while I'm waiting for you guys to get brave enough to speak out, I do want to share a couple things here. Viktor Frankl, he was asked by his students, he said they wanted to know in one sentence, Dr. Frankl, in one sentence, what is the meaning of your life? And this is what he wrote down. He wrote it down on a paper, and he said that the meaning of his life was to help others find the meaning of theirs. And I think that that's really important, because I think that when we can help others, empower others to find the meaning in their life, is when they get really excited about life, right? When people are passionate about that. And I want to share this one thing that I think is so key. And again, when I think of the suffering that people are enduring, I often just think of Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps. And one thing that is really sobering about that is, if you've read some of the information about that, the prisoners were starved. And so everyone, depending on your rank, was on a set caloric intake each day. And prisoners were the lowest, and their caloric intake was 200 calories a day. And it was down to a science. And so you can imagine how difficult this was. And this is printed on a plaque in Boston. They have a Holocaust memorial walkway that you can walk through. And it tells this story of a young lady who said that her friend found a raspberry in the camp one day and kept it safe in her pocket the whole day and presented it to her that night on a leaf. And she said, imagine a world in which your only possession is one raspberry and you give it to your friend. This is impactful because you gotta understand this little girl was living on 200 calories a day. So that raspberry would have been so needed, right? So the fact that she held on to that to give it to somebody else shows me that what was meaningful for her was her relationships. And we can't underestimate the power of that connection, the power of our relationships in that act of service, right? Service is the only thing that benefits the giver and the receiver. So I think finding meaning, doing service, really building these connections are so key when it comes to people being passionate about living and passionate about life. So just wanted to share that. Well, if any, I don't know if there were any questions. Erin, did any questions come in?
No questions. I think you did a great job of explaining everything.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope your restoration team was helpful throughout that conversation because I know it is a difficult topic to discuss, but thank you for sticking with it and for what you do. You're suicide preventers, and it's not easy work. So thank you for doing it and what you bring to your communities.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank
That was
you.
really great. Really appreciate it.